So on September this year, a typical 4-bedroom, 2-bath home in Sunnyvale sold for $782,000. By the way, that was over asking price. The asking price was $1.6 million, so they actually sold this 4-bedroom, 2-bath rancher that was built in the 50s for $2.4 million. That's mainly because the location was 1 mile from Apple's new headquarters. And so people working in urban areas are facing lifestyle compromises where the trade-off is ridiculously priced housing or crippling commutes. So we're here today to talk about how we can help reduce that crippling commute through advanced mobility. So welcome to the Future of Transportation and Mobility panel. We're going to be discussing how transportation technology is evolving to address these new urban realities. And I'll introduce the panel in a second. I'm Mike Harrigan. I'm a senior program manager with Prospect Silicon Valley. We are a nonprofit urban technology development and deployment center located here in San Jose. We work with local governments, established technology companies, startup companies, academia, national labs, and others in an effort to showcase technology that has the potential to improve urban lifestyle while maintaining growth and sustainability goals. We're fortunate today to have a really great panel of experts, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. Before I do that, our discussion is going to be divided into 4 parts. So the first part we're doing right now, the introductions. The second part will be a technology discussion, and then we're going to move into a policy discussion, and the last part will be audience questions. Because of the number of people here, we're going to accept questions via Twitter, and there should be a Twitter handle up there somewhere. I don't see it. Oh, at ProspectSV. No, that's not it. All the way at the bottom. Oh yeah, tweet at IYS_org to add your question to the organization. And they'll bring those questions up to me at the end of the presentation. So let's introduce our panel. So on my far left, your far right, is Jill North. Jill is the Transportation Innovation Manager for the City of San Jose. Although she's new to the public sector in her role as Innovation Program Manager, she is no stranger to how emerging technology can change the way people experience the world around them. She spent 5 years as a program manager for Street View at Google Maps, and she's looking to bring her expertise in leveraging technology to make San Jose the most innovative city in America. Jill is a native of Illinois. She earned her Bachelor of Business Administration at Illinois State and was granted a National CEO Award for Excellence in 2014 for her Street View collaboration with Parks Canada. Beyond her professional life, Jill enjoys whatever foot golf is. And the Oakland A's. I can see why you don't support the Giants this year.
Go A's.
It's okay.
That's okay.
Next to Jill is Ryan Popple. Ryan is the president and CEO of Proterra. For those of you who don't know, Proterra is the leading innovator of zero-emissions, battery-powered electric buses, transit buses. Prior to Proterra, Ryan was a partner at Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield and Byers, which is one of the larger venture capital companies in the Valley. And he was also an early employee of Tesla Motors as senior director of finance, and served as a board member he currently serves as a board member of Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Is focused on increasing access to affordable, sustainable transportation solutions throughout Silicon Valley and the Bay Area through strategic partnerships and policy initiatives. He's also a member of the California League of Conservation Voters Green Advisory Council, where he provides guidance on political and legislative priorities. And we're lucky to have Ryan. Just one more note on Ryan. He did serve in the U.S. Army, received a bachelor's in business administration from the College of William and Mary, and a master's in business from Harvard. Next to Ryan is Debs Schrimmer. Debs is the transportation policy manager with Lyft. She develops cutting-edge partnerships with transit agencies around the country and helps oversee Lyft's transportation policy initiatives around sustainability, infrastructure, and public strategy. let's see, prior to Lyft, she worked as a digital policy strategist at Code for America and as a transportation planner at the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. Debs received her BS from University of California, Davis, and that was in community and regional development, and she is an honoree of the Women's Transportation Seminar. Next to me is Benjamin McKeever, or Ben. Ben is a program manager with California Path, the California Path program. This is part of the Institute of Transportation Studies at the University of California at Berkeley. Ben is responsible for the development and growth of a robust and coherent program at Path in the area of connected and automated vehicle research. Prior to joining Path, Ben acquired over 18 years of experience working in both the private and public sector to develop intelligent transportation systems, solutions, and to improve safety and mobility on our transportation network. And most recently, he served as a team leader at the FHWA, Federal Highway Administration, Turner Fairbank Highway Research Center in the Office of Operations of RD, where he led a team of research engineers focused on developing and testing transformative studies, safety, mobility, and environmental applications. Ben holds a master's degree in civil engineering from the University of Texas at Austin and a Bachelor of Science degree in applied mathematics from the University of Virginia. He's also a registered civil engineer in California and Missouri. So thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to jump right into the technology discussion, and each of our panelists will give just a brief kind of overview of their organization when they answer their first question. So the first question is probably the one that's going to cause the most discussion here. How do you imagine autonomous vehicles will move from being science experiments to a realistic mobility solution? And I'd like to know about the time frame, whether these will be individually owned vehicles, public transit vehicles, shared mobility vehicles, or you name it. So I'd like to describe your imagined path of migration and what the infrastructure system looks like over the next 10 years. In other words, like, what is a bus in 2025? What is a transit agency in 2025? And I think I'd like to start with Ryan.
All right, well, thanks, Mike. And thanks to everybody for joining us right after lunch. We'll try to be as interesting as possible in a really relevant area and a very complex one in terms of the future of transportation. So just, Mike, you asked for a quick background on what each of our teams do, what each of our companies are involved in. Proterra is an electric vehicle manufacturer. We're solely focused on the heavy-duty sector. We've been working on that sector for the last several years. Our thesis is pretty straightforward in that we think high mileage, inefficient internal combustion engines, primarily those vehicles powered by heavy-duty diesel engines in emission-sensitive areas like cities, schools, farms, mines, those vehicles should be some of the first to economically gravitate towards electric vehicle technology. So what we've done to date as a company, we developed the first long-range purpose-built battery electric bus. It's also capable of very high power fast charging, so we can charge the vehicles at power levels up to 400 kilowatts. So that's 4 or 5 times higher probably than the highest power light-duty vehicle charger. We have a factory on the East Coast, factory on the West Coast, and we do our advanced R&D as well as battery production right here in the Bay Area in Burlingame, California. At this point, I think we have over 50 customers now deployed or on deck in the backlog. And I'd say that the electric vehicle revolution in surface mass transit vehicles has been very successful, but very quiet and understudied. A lot of you probably wouldn't know that there are electric buses already replacing diesel buses and natural gas in Nashville, in Louisville, in Seattle. They're showing up this fall in San Jose, Southern California. And a lot of agencies throughout the country, once they start deploying the technology, they start putting together a strategy or an action plan around 100% implementation. So just like a lot of municipal governments are looking at 100% renewable energy for their stationary energy footprint, they're also starting to look at 100% zero emission for their municipal footprint. And that includes probably their highest fuel footprint vehicle is a transit bus. So that's what we do. We make electric buses, and we do that better than anybody else in the world. We have models that can go over 200 miles on a single charge. So it's gotten pretty simple. Plug them in at night, drive them all day, and get roughly 4 or 5 times better energy efficiency than a diesel. In terms of how do we see the autonomous world, I guess this is the $64 billion question, maybe even larger than that, given the size of these markets. We are already starting to deploy autonomous vehicle technology to enhance the performance of our vehicles, so it's not a hypothetical, it's there. We use it to align the vehicles for charging, and that sounds like something that's fairly simple to do, but if you got to do a task 100,000 times in a year and you leave it up to the driver, you're going to have human error. So we're already using systems like that. We have a pilot going on in Reno, Nevada, where we still have a driver in the vehicle, but we're using autonomous technology for object detection and location correction. So how does the vehicle realign itself on its internal map after it's lost GPS signal, as an example? And how good is the vehicle using sensors like LiDAR and camera vision to pick up pedestrians, cyclists, stray cat, paper bag blows across the road, et cetera, as well as traffic signals? How this is all going to play out, I think we're going to see rapid implementation of EV technology in a lot of these sectors, vehicles like Lyft, vehicles like Proterra, and I think that'll be the first technology wave, but right behind it and basically in parallel, but maybe lagged a couple years behind, will be AV. The obvious places where we see AV generating a lot of quick wins will be things like bus rapid transit lanes. If you're not familiar with BRT, that's where you run buses like trains, and you give them a dedicated lane. You have raised platform boarding, very similar to how you'd take light rail at the airport. And there are countries throughout the world that have learned to use buses as efficiently as rail. We already have autonomous trains, so there's no reason why we can't have autonomous bus rapid transit. I think first mile, last mile is going to be very interesting. And I'll cut to the chase and say that the area that I'm most concerned about, that I see the biggest challenge in, is just making sure that we can serve the market equitably. All of our vehicles today have to be ADA compliant because transit buses and trains are the bedrock of our transportation infrastructure. So what that means is handicap accessibility, wheelchair ramps, drivers who are trained to properly strap down a wheelchair, drivers who are trained to handle the emergency response of a 13-year-old runaway getting onto a bus. There's a lot that happens in mass transit that I have not yet seen an autonomous solution for. So I put a stake in the ground and say, I don't think we're going to go to a world with absolutely no human involvement. I do think AV will make this a lot more efficient. Maybe every third bus is going to have a driver, but at least based on our experience, especially with the ADA, the child and the senior citizen question, you'll need vehicles in your fleet, in your arsenal, that can handle the diversity of mission that's required if you're going to move everybody.
Thanks, Ryan. Debs, Lyft made a big announcement last week about deployment of autonomous vehicle technology locally. So I'd like you to take a crack at this question next.
Sure. Well, I want to thank you for having Lyft on the panel, and I want to thank Innovate Your State for thinking about this issue and having this panel. I think this is a really exciting time to be thinking about the future of transportation, and it's just really great to see so many people thinking about this issue, wondering, what is that nexus between transportation, technology, policy? How does it impact our cities? I think you're right. From Lyft's perspective, we are not treating autonomous vehicles as science fiction, as you put it. This is very much a real thing that's happening, and what we're betting on is that ride sharing is actually going to be this really important gateway into autonomous vehicles, and our platform is going to be the way that many people actually experience and get educated on autonomous vehicles through this platform model. And just for curiosity, how many of you have taken a Lyft ride before? This morning. Perfect. So I think this points to it right there that many people in the audience are familiar with Lyft and ride sharing, and we're a 5-year-old industry, but we're growing very quickly, and I think that in the way that ride sharing has grown, we'll see a similar pathway of adoption for autonomous vehicles. Getting a little bit more into the mechanics of what does Lyft's strategy for autonomous vehicles look like, we're really excited to be operating at the intersection of shared, autonomous, and electrification. And these are all three phenomena that we didn't create, but we see a lot of market forces working together, driving towards that convergence. So when I say shared, I'm really talking about we don't envision people owning their own autonomous vehicles. We see people subscribing to a network and participating in a fleet where people are able to summon a Lyft when they need it. They're able to participate in a larger ecosystem of transportation options. Sometimes they'll bike, sometimes they'll walk, sometimes they'll take transit. And then when they need to, they can request an autonomous Lyft. When I talk about electrification, we think that there's very significant, not only business and economic reasons for why electric vehicles are the right way to think about leveraging a fleet. It's actually really important for reaching sustainability and climate goals. We need to be focused on ways to clean up the transportation sector, and electric vehicles are really proven for doing that. We at Lyft are really focused on the year 2025.
Okay.
And we think that by 2025, private car ownership in the United States is going to look very different. We think that by 2025, the majority of Lyft rides will actually be performed by electric autonomous vehicles through this fleet model. And we're expecting to be doing about 1 billion rides on electric autonomous vehicles. And so to get there, we have announced some partnerships. Like you mentioned, we announced last week that we're partnering up with Drive AI, which is a Mountain View-based company doing AI to power the brains of autonomous vehicles. And we've announced other partnerships this year. We're working with General Motors, we're working with Jaguar Land Rover, we're working with Newtonomy and Waymo, and we're really taking this ecosystem approach where Lyft isn't building the vehicles, but we offer this network and lots of data about how people take rides and how to strategically position these vehicles. And we're opening up this platform and making it available to partners that meet our criteria to join us in building this network. And that's something we're really excited about, and we hope by the end of this year to have our first public pilot happening on the streets.
I can hardly wait. Jill, you are championing, leading the autonomous vehicle request for information program with the city of San Jose. Tell us a little bit about that program, and try to answer some of these questions that I posed here.
Sure.
And don't talk right directly.
Yeah, I won't. Yeah. My name is Jill North. As Mike mentioned, Innovation Program Manager for the Department of Transportation in the City of San Jose. On June 1st, we issued out a request for information following 2 roundtable discussions inviting industry to the city to kind of best identify how we could have pilot programs with autonomous vehicles solving some of our critical transportation challenges. The request for information deadline closed on July 30th, and we're currently in the process of vetting through and exploring these different concepts, hopefully to provide some really great solutions for the city in the near future.
Okay.
Good?
So any predictions on what 2025 looks like?
Yeah, well, the question started out with what does
How do
it
we
look
move
like?
from science experiment to?
Are we in science? But autonomous vehicles, there's the argument that, really the technology has kind of been around since like the 70s. You look at BART, that's an autonomous vehicle. And the DARPA challenge was actually 15 years ago at this point. So, I don't know if I think we're in a time of transition more so than kind of a science experiment where we've passed through the skunk works phase of the product life cycle. Now we're on this upward trend. And so for the next 10 to 15 years, I think we're going to see a lot of iterations in the components and the technology before it's actually scalable for, to a point that it's, somewhat mature.
And so do you go along with what Debs said about 2025 being a year when almost where private ownership of vehicles becomes extinct and we're all basically using rideshare? And
I agree with several of Debs' points. I think that 2025 we'll see fleet vehicles with autonomous vehicle components. I think that our vehicles that are human driven in general will have many autonomous vehicle components to them. I don't think that it'll be a fully autonomous world by any means, but that's kind of the iterative process that I think we'll be at that point.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Ben, you're batting cleanup here.
Sure.
So tell us about the path, kind of view of where, what's required to actually enable autonomous vehicles and what your predictions are for the year 2025.
Sure. Love to chime in, Mike. First, I'll also thank Innovate Your State for having me on the panel and organizing this great event. Happy to be here, and thank you for that. Very briefly, I'll just give you a little bit of an idea of what PATH does. We're part of UC Berkeley. We're a research program there. There's many others within the Institute of Transportation Studies. Our focus, and we've been around for 30 years, has been on intelligent transportation systems. And PATH was one of the leaders actually in the first AV pilot test in 1997 in California, which seems like a long time ago, but it just gives you an idea of how long this technology has been around and how long it takes to actually come to fruition. Now, admittedly, in the last couple of years, things have really accelerated more than I've ever imagined. So it has changed quite a bit, but I'm going to throw out a slightly more skeptical or conservative prediction. I'm going to say it's going to be 20 years or so before we see anything close to a full rollout, 100% deployment of fully autonomous vehicles that are self-driving. That said, I think there's obviously going to be huge developments, and there already have been in the coming years, advances in technology. You'll see what's referred to in the industry as level 1, level 2 systems, which are already out there today. That's things like automatic braking, Tesla's autopilot, car that parks itself. I think, actually, let's just take a poll here. How many people actually own a car that has some level of, whether it's adaptive cruise control, self-parking, automatic braking, show of hands as to, or even just driver assist, where they keep lane keeping? So probably
Half?
Maybe not half, but close to half.
Close to it, yeah.
So in the next few years, I think you're going to see that'll probably be standard in most vehicles. And that's level 2. So you get to level 3, 5, that's when the car actually has to monitor. The person's out of the loop, and the car is responsible for knowing what's going on. And that gets a little trickier, and the research in that area is still ongoing. It's a tougher nut to crack, and it's a bigger potential safety challenge. So I think that is going to occur, but it's going to be more in pilots, things like what Jill was referring to. I know San Francisco is also looking at doing an RFI for automated vehicle pilots. So those types of things, I think, will be occurring in the next 5, 10 years, and hopefully larger and larger numbers of vehicles. And we'll learn a lot from that and learn how to deploy these systems safely and efficiently and properly. I think that the rollout will probably be in certain limited areas initially, perhaps like managed lanes, special lanes, where
BRTs, right?
BRT was a great example where you have fixed routes, and it's a slightly easier problem because you can map out a specific area and perhaps have infrastructure in place that supports automated vehicles. And then as far as the infrastructure goes, I think the cities and governments are going to need to improve things as simple as pavement striping and signage and things like that. We've already heard from a lot of the AV companies that needs to be improved. That's kind of the easier problem. I think what's more interesting is sort of more sophisticated infrastructure enhancements, the ability to communicate with the vehicle. So you're talking about connectivity. More and more vehicles are going to have connectivity, whether it's wireless cellular type things in the vehicle, or things the government's looking at mandating, like dedicated short-range communications, a program I worked on in the federal government, V2V communications. Those types of things are going to happen, and I think it'll be really interesting to see how governments embrace that technology and actually become part of the solution, so we don't have fleets of vehicles and automated vehicles driving around their own, but actually controlled as a network. So I'll stop there, but
Okay.
I think I would say it's probably going to be longer than 2025. Although a lot will happen between now and then.
Great. So I'm going to actually skip to our third question then on our sheet here, and that is, I'd like to explore what issues with connected mobility, how it will affect the public. And so what I'm really thinking of is, what do you imagine the public concerns to be? Is it security issues? Is it privacy issues? Is it safety issues? That sort of thing. And along with this, I'd like to also maybe enter into the discussion of what could, especially electric vehicles, how could they be better accepted by the public? And where I'm going with this is, how could they be useful in ways that we don't use vehicles now? And so an example is, like with Ryan, would be, is an electric bus a mobile power supply in the case of a disaster? That's kind of the question I'm asking. So it's kind of a two-pronged question. One is, what does it take? What is the public going to be concerned about? And secondly, how can we leverage some unique capabilities of these vehicles to make that acceptance better? And Debs, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. So, I think that with this new autonomous vehicle technology, it raises all sorts of questions that both the private and the public sector are thinking about. Issues of safety are obviously paramount. I mean, we know how many lives are lost each year due to human error in car crashes, and this technology has tremendous potential to eliminate that, but we need to be responsible in the timing and the securities in place of rolling out this technology. And of course, to your point around data, I think that the public sector is asking a lot of really good questions around, what types of opportunity do these new AVs present in helping the public sector better understand their transportation network. And I think that there is certainly benefit to thinking more creatively about what types of data sharing can exist between the public and private sector. This is certainly something that Lyft has been looking at through our partnerships today that we have with public transit agencies, where we're actually helping them reimagine how they deliver services and use ride sharing as another tool in certain use cases where it's really hard to provide bus service or something like that, be it first and last mile connections, late night hours, things like that. But we need to be really sure that, with the unprecedented amount of data that comes with autonomous vehicles, both on the user and the vehicle, we need to make sure that privacy is protected. And I think Lyft has, a very important charge to protect the privacy of our customers, and thinking about what our digital footprint looks like when you're using smartphones to request rides. An individual's mobility patterns is very unique across time and space, and potentially sharing this information with the public sector raises lots of questions around how can this data, while well-intended for planning purposes, actually reveal who that individual is, because someone traveling during the days of the week, going to and from work, knowing exactly where someone starts and ends a trip can reveal a lot about an individual. So I think, we need to think about, what types of aggregation and privacy mechanisms are in place to help protect that personally identifiable information. But on the other side of the spectrum, there's so much information that these vehicles will be collecting through mapping and sensor technology that could also be available for cities to use to better understand the performance of their transportation network, be that through looking at potholes or better understanding how to time traffic signals. So I think we're right now at the early stages of that, but I think that as autonomous vehicles continue to grow, it will certainly be an issue to think through these data implications.
So Jill, kind of leveraging on this, the whole thing of data, and I mean, it's actually getting into the next question as well, but I really would like to explore this question of who actually owns the data. You have a self-driving or autonomous vehicle, or even a non-self-driving vehicle that is connected and sensor-laden, collecting data, does that information belong to the company that owns the vehicle, the company that operates the vehicle? Does it belong to the public? Does it belong to the city where that vehicle is operating? How does the city of San Jose see this?
The city of San Jose. Okay, because I was going to answer it personally, but that's okay.
You can answer personally.
Well, that's a really good question. And we're in the middle of having a lot of conversations on what kind of data, if there is any, that the city is interested in basically handling. There's a lot that goes along with data other than just having access to data, including storage. That's an ongoing cost. So it might not make sense. We're currently, developing a policy around there. But in terms of the value of something that could be presented to a city as a dashboard or any kind of flag, like Debs was mentioning, that's powerful. These autonomous vehicles will really be a whole new set of eyes and ears for us that could provide an extra benefit for our residents. So instead of them having to pick up the phone, we already know about it ahead of time. It's kind of changing the way that we function as a government so that we're not so much reactive as much as we are we will move into a proactive, and using data to help us better make those decisions is critical.
Great. Ryan, any thoughts on this? And especially that other part of the question that we discussed earlier, which is the use of high-powered electric vehicles in cases of national emergencies, national disasters like we saw with Harvey and with Irma recently.
Yeah, that's a fascinating topic in terms of how could we improve upon resiliency as we move toward more advanced forms of technology. The question is related to these more sustainable technologies, both in terms of treating the root cause and in terms of dealing with the symptoms. I've been involved with electric vehicles now for over 10 years, and my primary motivation for working on them is because of the environmental benefit. If you look at a state like California, we've done a tremendous amount to reduce the emissions footprint of our stationary energy, but our transportation emissions, both globally and locally, so that the CO2 we put in the atmosphere that's cooking the planet and the local pollution that's shortening our lives in an acute manner, that set of problems is now bigger than the stationary environment. So transportation is the number one emissions challenge. It's the number one energy security challenge. It's the number one local pollution challenge, whether you're in a developed world or developing. So that's sort of my bias on all this. When I look at questions like resiliency, I don't know if you saw this story today, but really tragic news out of Miami. There was a nursing home, power had gone out for a couple days, and they lost 6 patients just in the process of evacuating them. And that's just a microcosm of how much damage some of these superstorms are doing. I look at what happened with Katrina, Rita, Harvey, Irma, Katia, Jose. You lose track of them, but on all of them, we actually got quite lucky. If Irma had hit Miami-Dade with the same force that it hit Turks and Caicos, we would have lost one of the largest cities in the United States. It came ashore as a Category 2 or 3 hurricane and well west of Miami-Dade. It hit some of the smaller islands as a Category 5. So I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we have to electrify transportation, or the rest of this is a fairly academic discussion that people can enjoy after they look at how we scorch the planet. And the reason I mention it is one of the risks of autonomous vehicle technology is there are too many policymakers and leaders and people in tech who are treating it like a silver bullet. Whenever a problem is going to be magically solved by autonomous vehicles, I get really skeptical. So if your business model doesn't work because you need drivers, but don't worry, I'm going to go autonomous and then I'm going to make a lot of money, I would not invest in that. Or if you don't even have a way to run your business without going to full AV, I'd be very cautious about that. If you're a city and you think traffic is just magically going to go away because cars will be following each other 6 inches away, that's not going to work. It was not actually Lyft, it was Uber. But I went to a sporting event where they tried to handle all of the inbound and outbound transportation with Uber cars. And the problem is just the queuing of a car pulling up, one person getting in, and then pulling away. It's like trying to get a cab in Vegas. The load-unload time doesn't work. We know about it in our business because we have some customers that need 5 doors on a bus. Because when the vehicle stops, it's like a landing ship at Normandy. Like they need people out of it and off the bus, and they're watching a schedule. So these are not trivial problems. If you're Tokyo Metro and you've got to move 4 million people every morning, I completely agree with what you said in terms of this being a network. But so one major issue I see is if we believe that AV is going to be a miracle and it just solves everything, emissions, urban planning, road congestion, global poverty, we're setting ourselves up for failure. And if we put off major infrastructure decisions, for example, Caltrain's bursting at the seams, 130,000 rides and it needs to be over 200,000. If we decide let's not beef up Caltrain because autonomous will fix the issue of mass transit up and down the peninsula, I think that'd be really foolish. In terms of resiliency, I mean, there's so much more you can do with EV. And I noticed in Florida, one of the first things that happened as the hurricane came in is they ran out of gasoline.
Right.
So we think that somehow the status quo is really safe. It's actually incredibly thin and tenuous. We took 25% of US refining capacity offline during Harvey, and that was just a random storm. So you think about war, terrorism, I mean, we very much have all our eggs in one basket. Clearly things like vehicle to grid, we build buses that some of them have 600 kilowatt hours of energy storage per bus. You could send an electric school bus to a hospital and keep the hospital going. We've done tests where we can drive the vehicles 500 to 1,000 miles, so you could have long-range evacuation. The last point I'll make is I think that electric vehicles, fleet vehicles, whether it's Lyft or Proterra, they're going to be a godsend to the utility because the utilities are struggling with declining load. LED lighting, distributed generation, their demand for electricity is dropping. They really need load on the grid, especially at night as we come off of the grid. So there could be an opportunity to actually lower our cost of electricity if we've got a bunch of electric vehicles to plug into at night.
Great. I'm going to move to, how are we doing on time? 10 minutes. Huh?
Wow.
I want to move to our final question. This is into the policy part. So last week, the U.S. Congress, House of Representatives, passed what is called the Self-Drive Act. The Self-Drive Act basically says that bans states and local governments from making laws around safety, development, and operation of autonomous vehicles. It puts it all in the hands of the federal government. There's pros and cons to this, and I'd like to hear what you think the pros and cons are. I'm going to start with Ben.
Sure.
So if you could just talk about, to me, it's like, what's the right thing here? Should the federal government be making laws for the entire land, or should we be allowing local governments to have their own local regulations around, and especially state governments?
And you're referring to the Self-Drive Act
Yes.
of last week that the
Yes.
House passed, but the Senate now needs to take up.
I'll point out that the House passed it unanimously, which is relatively unique in this
Correct.
political climate.
So yeah, a few thoughts on that. I think one of the things that a lot of the AV industry is happy about with this happening is it does provide a lot of clarity on some of these regulatory questions as to what the role of federal government versus state is. And it seems to be a little bit of a continuation of the way things are now, and I tend to think it's logical, where the federal government, their main role is in basically regulating the vehicle and the systems in the vehicle and the equipment in the vehicle. And then the state's role is in basically regulating the driver and the human operator and the operations of the vehicle. So the state will still be responsible for things like driver's license, regulation, insurance, things like that. And
But when you have self-driving cars, those lines are blurred.
they are.
So
They are.
who gets the driver's license here?
Well, that'll be interesting. And I think the federal government they've given a little bit of guidance in that area, certainly on the safety and the performance standards side. But some of these things, they basically, I think my understanding is the extent of the guidance they've given is we don't want a patchwork of different rules and regulations in every state. Right. We want the states to all follow the same rules in terms of regulation and giving out driver's license and things like that. And they have some guidance in that area, but this is going to be messy. I think the downside of this is basically, my understanding is they're putting it all on NHTSA, and they have like a 1-year milestone to achieve something and 2-year milestone, have it all figured out, how this whole thing, all the details get implemented and rolled out. So I would say that's the biggest risk in this, is that they might be putting too much on NHTSA's plate, who they may not be able to come up with all the answers.
So Debs, does Lyft have a position on this?
So I would say that, we certainly agree that there's different roles that different levels of government can play with the rollout of, safe, sound AV policy and regulations, and certain things in order to make sure that there's uniform standards make sense at the federal level, but there's certainly a role that the state should be playing, as well as at the local level. And I think, sort of going back to what Ryan was talking about, I think, there are a lot of really important things that cities need to be thinking about with the rollout of AVs, and making sure that we continue to support and invest in public transit, because it is the backbone of our communities. It's what is most efficiently able to move people at scale. It's what can be an anchor for transit-oriented development, and making sure that we're growing in a way that is sound and doesn't promote sprawl. There's really important things that the local level needs to be thinking about with regards to how they manage their transportation network, be it through managed lanes that support higher occupancy vehicles, or if they start thinking about pricing strategies to mitigate congestion, and getting really serious about congestion pricing to make sure that we're not creating the hell situation of autonomous vehicles just riding around willy-nilly. So I think that there's really important roles that each level of government needs to play, and a lot of the things that the cities have are best connected to managing congestion, thinking about the built environment, and then infrastructure, and also making sure that there's a supply of electric vehicle charging stations, and thinking about power. I mean, these are all different things that the regulators need to be thinking about.
Jill, I'm sure the city, with its autonomous vehicle request for information project, is thinking about, like, what can we do? Where are we now with this potential actual federal legislation coming through? Is that a concern?
No, it's not.
Good.
And let me tell you why. Because, innovation is really, who the city of San Jose is. And so we never want to be in a position where we're stifling innovation. So it's been our position on federal and state the regulations that are coming through to basically voice what we are interested in getting as a local municipality. But we are not really interested in, as a local government, regulating AVs. Other cities have different takes on that. That's kind of where we stand on it. However, we do have a lot of interest in, opportunities, like I said, for data sharing, just so that we're preparing our city for an autonomous future in a way that's going to be compatible. And then also, of course, safety is huge. And so anything where that might be a question where there's no action as a result of something being proven to be unsafe, we definitely want our voice to be heard in terms of making sure that we're getting sound policy on the state and federal levels.
Makes sense. Ryan, just quickly, is there a Proterra position on this? And I've got a couple of audience questions I'd like to get to.
I don't have anything to add. I think my fellow panelists actually know a lot more about that act than I do.
Okay. So I would like to start with you on the first question, and that is, what does the commute between San Jose and San Francisco look like in 2025?
Oh, man.
You threw us a curveball.
Yeah, what I fear is it's probably just as bad as it is today, and partly because
Well, how bad is it?
it's really bad today. I mean, come on. The only time I've seen traffic in the Bay Area let up at all was a little bit after the Great Recession. But I wouldn't recommend a Great Recession as a way to mitigate traffic. That's a little bit of a scorched
It's a traffic mitigation strategy.
Yeah, right. Kill the economy. So, the reason I think congestion will be, we will have congestion if we continue to price roads the way we currently do, which is as a tragedy of the commons. So if you can just get on a road and drive as much as you want, we're going to have congestion, because who wouldn't want to go wherever they want to go when they want to go, and that's why.
In their single occupancy vehicle.
Yeah, well, we even have congestion with like the tech buses now. There are so many tech buses in the high occupancy lane.
Right.
Even that lane is slowing down. So if we continue to
And Tesla drivers.
yeah, maybe. Some of those. But if we continue to let people have an all-you-can-eat model on roads, we will have congestion, and especially in a highly desirable place to live, like your major cities. So the only thing that mitigates the use of a road is when it gets so awful that people just stop using it. LA, though, has stretched that limit to capacity, so I don't even know if that's a good example. What I'd like to see, what I hope we see, is I hope we have a really strong backbone of things like highly accessible, equitable mass transit, and that's not just buses. It could be trains, it can be the ferry that goes from Tiburon to San Francisco.
Hyperloop.
Yeah, Hyperloop. I don't care what it is. It could be drone quadcopters that carry us from point A to point B. I hope we have really efficient first mile, last mile, and that'll be things like Lyft or things like Uber, or maybe your own car. I'm not an expert on this, so I don't know how that is going to work. And I also hope we stop thinking about sidewalks as this thing you put on the side of the street, and it's like a necessary evil for those humans. I hope that we create more zero emission and more zero vehicle zones. In 2025, I hope I can go into downtown San Francisco, Oakland, or San Jose, and I feel more at home on a bike or walking my dog or taking my kid to a park than dodging a truck or even a big old bus. Because the surveys we've seen, people are happiest if they can spend that first and last mile a little bit of time physically moving themselves. So whether it's a bike, a scooter, on foot.
Walk.
So by 2025, what I hope is that the city makes human beings more of a priority than cars. I hope personal car ownership is on its way to extinction. My perfect commute would be like, I don't know, ride my bike to transit, take transit, and then if I've got a meeting that's somewhere off transit, hail a Lyft. Like that works for me.
Right. So Jill, same question. What does the commute look like between San Francisco, San Jose 2025? And you can work into it, how can we, because Ryan did this, how can we innovate roads to be less expensive, quicker to deploy, and have fewer bottlenecks at intersections and
Well, I'm
stoplights?
gonna throw a curveball back. So what if by 2025, 2030, I think I got this idea off of you, Ben, so I apologize.
All right, it's okay to play
We're in a
games.
virtual world. So instead of having morning and evening commutes, virtual reality kind of takes over. We're doing this conference right here, right now, but we all are sitting in our living rooms with our headsets on. Is that more of where we're going in the
Telepresence.
That's right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
He's a researcher,
Ben?
so.
What's the commute going to look like? You said between San Francisco and San
San
Jose,
Jose.
for
Yeah,
instance.
I
Well,
mean,
if the
it's-
job market continues the way it is, which I guess is.
Are we going to all be buying $2.5 million homes in Sunnyvale? I mean, that's the.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to get a whole lot better. I do know, I guess, from the practical side of things, some of the projects we've been working on with Caltrans, that 101 is a huge issue and a huge high priority corridor. I know they're talking about putting a managed lane pretty much the extent of the whole corridor. Hopefully that gets deployed by 2025. I would hope that there's opportunities to use
So
that.
what is a managed lane, like a bus rapid transit lane? Is that what you're talking about?
A managed lane essentially is like an HOV lane that can also be an express lane, so you can pay to get into the lane, but then it can be managed by occupancy. You can control the number of people in a vehicle based on real-time traffic conditions. You can allow only buses at certain times of day, or Lyft people might get preference if there's a certain number of people in the car. So it allows you to basically squeeze more capacity out of the existing roadway.
So, I mean, one of the things I've heard over and over again is that the only way we're really going to address congestion is by getting more people into vehicles and have fewer single occupancy vehicles. Lyft sort of is trying to do that. So I'm going to finish with you, Deb. We're almost done. I see you out there waving at me, Allie. We're almost done here. So,
Lyft Line.
So Deb, it's on you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're hinting at some of the really great experimental services and products that Lyft has been investing in. We operate a service called Lyft Line, which is able to match people in real time that are co-located heading in similar directions. And this is a way for us to really kind of take that next level of carpooling and use real-time technology to fill the seats of the car. I think that passing policies and dedicating our infrastructure in a way that helps incentivize people to take shared rides is going to be really critical. And I think as civic technologists in the room, I think everyone here can agree that technology has never been and will never be a silver bullet to solving these problems. And we need to really be operating at that intersection of technology and policy. So certainly there's things like Lyft Line that can help with that, but we need to have those pricing policies in place. We need to have those investments in public transit. We need to be thinking about managed lanes and using that to work together, as well as just being creative with, new types of multimodal solutions. The more options that we can have to discourage people from driving alone. So maybe it's ferries, bike share. All of these things are going to be working together to help combat that alternative of owning a car and driving alone. Okay, well, we've run out of time. In fact, I'm sure we're quite a bit over time. But I'd like to please join me in thanking our panel. You guys did a great job. Thank you very much.